We've got an incredible group of people. Jess, I was in Food Matters as well. We did an amazing episode with you about plastic. Obviously, plastic waste, as I said, is a huge issue, and Jess, I think, can speak to this issue in particular, but she's also, through her store, any Good Neighbour customers in here tonight? Jess, there you go, Jess, yeah. Nice one. Nice to see you all. Are they plants? Did you pay people to come?
They're on my guest list.
Yeah. So, an amazing store, latterly in Dundrum, now in Rathmines, and has created something I think can be a real alternative to the current system. But Jess, please introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everyone. So I own the Good Neighbour. As Mick said, we're in Rathmines. We are a refill shop. So if you haven't been into one, a refill shop gives our customers the option to refill their containers. We sell everything in bulk, as big as we can, so 25 kilos or more for most of our products. And our customers can come in and refill everything from their rice to their washing up liquid, shampoo, oil, everything. And I think most people in this room probably feel the same way as I did before starting the shop. I was frustrated. I came home every week from the supermarket with a trolley full of plastic, and there was no alternative. And I felt very helpless because I thought, I want to change and there's nothing out there. I was living in Toronto at the time, and I found a refill shop, and I was skeptical. I went in and I thought, it can't be this easy. It's going to be expensive. And I was delighted to see it was not more expensive, and it was very easy. So I decided to come back to Dublin and open up the shop. So our main focus is on plastic pollution. Our goal is to reduce it as much as possible. But the other side of the shop is reducing food pollution, or food waste. Because if you want to try a new recipe, you have to buy a preset amount. You have to buy a spice jar. You have to buy a kilo of rice. You have to buy, whatever preset amount the supermarket has decided. And I found myself wasting so many good ingredients because I bought it for something, didn't love it, and never thought of anything else to do with that food. So we allow people to buy exactly what they want. You can come in and you can buy a single whole nutmeg, or you can buy 4 kilos of rice.
Wow.
So in that way, people are reducing not only their plastic waste, but also their food waste. And
do you get students coming in buying 2 pieces of spaghetti? That'd be my worry as a proprietor. Like.
Yeah, well, you know what? Honestly, we love when people do that.
Okay. You don't really love it though, right?
We do. We do. We love it when we have a lot of older people who live on their own. They don't want to buy, the whole jar, the whole case of whatever it is. And we've been open for almost 5 years, and I'm delighted to say it just keeps growing. People are really interested in what we're doing, and they're interested in doing what they can.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing. It's empowering to feel like you are making a change, even if it's a small one.
Amazing. Thank you. And we'll be getting into all that in a lot more detail as well. Karen O'Donoghue, not to be confused with the Karen O'Donoghue who co-presented Grow Cook Eat with me, but Karen is here because, I'm a Happy Tummy customer, and I just love the idea of a food brand that's bucking the trend of cheap food that is such a scourge. And also a success story for rural Ireland as well. But Karen, will you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you. So the Happy Tummy Company sits between being a GP practice and a bakery. Basically, I had a big poo challenge, and I spent my whole life constipated, which is wonderful.
I didn't think you were going to get this into this early.
But
hey, go for it.
So over 10 years ago, my mental health, my period health, and my gut health were all really terrible. And so I started chewing up science papers on the microbiome. And out of 18 months, I came up with a mathematical equation based on how your gut bacteria likes to eat. And it was this equation that resolved my lifelong IBS. And I tested the product on 100 people across London who were sufferers of either the IBS diarrhea kind or constipation kind. And this particular ratio worked for all of them. And thus began the Happy Tummy Company out of my kitchen in East London. And our kind of raison d'etre is to reduce the percentage of Irish people that die from heart disease and cancer. By sticking to the recommended daily allowance of fibre every day, you reduce your chance of contracting a cancer, a mental health issue, or indeed heart disease by 30%. And so we're trying to get people eating foods that are going to give them a long and happy life. And since the get-go, we have been completely sustainable in terms of our packaging. and we only bake to order, which is very frustrating for most people that aren't au fait with the brand. But as soon as they get on board, it's been quite transformative. And I suppose something that I'm really proud of is we have been saving people's bowels. So lots of people reach out to us. They're 2 weeks away from getting their bowel removed. They get on the bread for 14 days. They go to surgery. They get to keep their bowel. So food is really, really transformative. But what we're about is trying to reconnect with how we were eating before the 1900s. And that's how we develop all our recipes.
Amazing. Can you just say real quick, how did you get from London to the west of Ireland then?
So I was doing one of these talks in London one day, and I passed a cafe that said salad in 60 seconds or less. And I was just like, fuck me, I need to leave this town.
That's a good answer. So you moved to where in the West?
I was just like, people are fucking awful. And so I just needed to get away from people. And so I moved to Sussex, where I taught people how to bake bread on fire, because I thought the idea of food empathy and getting back to this behavior of like making your own food with very little would make me a happier person at the very least. And so, I built a school there in the middle of a sheep farm. And I did that for 2 years. And then COVID hit and Brexit hit and the whole world was beginning to tumble. And I had a dog called Biggie Smalls, and I just was like, I think it's time to go home. I always wanted to do what I do here in Ireland now, here in Ireland, because of the reasons I've given you. And so there was 2 places in Ireland at the time. There was one near Moore Hall, and there was one in Limerick that would rent a place to a single woman with a dog. And so my mother, before she passed away of cancer, she had spiritual experiences in Mayo, and so Mayo got the vote. And 3 weeks after moving to Westport, I found the location for the Happy Tummy Company, and from there, it's been amazing because of Irish people and their attitude to their health, really, fundamentally.
Brilliant. Thank you. Karen, we'll get back into that all in a minute. So what an extraordinary story that is as well. Paul Brophy is here with us tonight. Again, we interviewed Paul in Food Matters, so you can check out that episode as well. And also interviewed him recently for, as we did with Karen, for our podcast. And we I don't know, no, you coined the phrase broccoli barn, I think, Paul.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Oh, we did. Oh, sorry, that was me. Yeah.
No.
No, it wasn't me either.
Ella McSweeney did.
Ah, who's also here. Well done, Ella. She can take the credit for that. So it's a really cool name, a broccoli barn. I think it should have its own series. But Paul is here because he's one of our most successful veg growers. The scale that he's operating, I mean, the two guys are, running small SMEs, I guess. Paul is on a different scale altogether in terms of the output that he has, and he has like that. All of the problems that I was speaking to that our veg sector is facing, that I think for anyone who's interested in eating plants in the future, we need to be really, really worried about. Paul has some really unique insights on that, and particularly what it's like to be a veg grower, dealing with supermarkets and trying to grow in the face of extraordinary climate change related weather events. Paul, will you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Mick. I looked at one of the slides that you put up earlier, and it brought me back to my beginnings. And the slide was Imagine. And my beginnings were when I was 12 years of age. I was in primary school, and I was from a mixed farming background, no horticulture whatsoever on the farm. And a teacher came into the class, there was a hardware closing down. And he said, does anyone have a vegetable garden? And a bit like the straw poll you did here earlier on, did anyone ever grow anything? And a few people put their hands up, I didn't. And he said, would anyone like to start a vegetable garden? And I put my hand up, and I got 3 packets of vegetable seeds from that teacher. Brussels sprouts, carrots and parsley. And I brought them home, and I meekly asked my dad, could I dig up his lawn to start a vegetable garden? And my dad was a very trusting man and believing man, and he pointed me to a piece of ground at the back of the house, I have to admit, but out of sight, and was probably about the size of a grave, 6x4 or whatever, 6x3, and he said, there. But if you mess it up, you can fix it up. So the teacher had a garden of his own, and he used to bring us every Friday to his house and he showed us how to dig, he showed us how to rake, sow, and at 12 years of age, I set out to do my own. So I put the 3 crops in the ground, and 2 of the 3 grew. We had 2 Brussels sprout plants, which we ate for Christmas. The carrots I sowed too thickly, they intertwined and they were all twisted around each other, and the parsley didn't grow. And as an inquisitive 12-year-old, I was fascinated as to why it didn't grow. I joined the library, and I got a book by a gardener called Percy Trower. There was no internet in those days. And I learned that I had sown the parsley too deep. I became absolutely fascinated and wouldn't make that mistake next year. So for my 13th Christmas present, I got a 12x4 or 12x8 glass house, and Dad let me put this up at the side of the house, so we were gaining in confidence as we went on. And it absolutely fascinated me what I could grow in that glasshouse. Tomatoes, lettuce, strawberries, peppers, cucumbers. I started growing bedding plants for the garden. I became absolutely infatuated with horticulture. And all I wanted to do from when I was 13 years of age was study horticulture and change the plan of the farm from being a mixed farm into a horticultural enterprise.
So your dad was a farmer. What was he farming at the time when you
cattle and sheep, Mick. You met him on the farm
did, yeah.
actually one of the days. Yeah, he's passed away since, but he inspired me to keep going. He got really interested, particularly in the glasshouse end of things, and he started to help me with it. And I went to a college. I studied horticulture, and I came home, and I started my enterprise. Probably he had an illness, he got brucellosis, and he had to keep away from cattle. He asked me could I take a career break from my job, and I took a career break for a couple of months, and no money was coming forward for my wages. And I had a difficult conversation with Dad as to how was I going to afford a few pints after a game of rugby. I'd left a paying job, and Dad broke the news to me that the farm was practically broke and it was going to be sold. So I said I'd put some of my business skills to use, that I had studied a bit of business as part of horticulture in college. And I asked him to give me the use of 5 acres of land, rent-free for a year, in lieu of wages. And today we grow 750 acres of vegetables on our farm. And we are... We're the single largest broccoli growers in the country, but by default, more than by design. I didn't set out. I set out as a mixed market garden, and I was doing a box round. At the time of Glen Rowe, for anyone old enough in the room to remember it, I had a girlfriend and myself, and we used to head around the housing estates selling my produce to the houses of Naas. And I very, very quickly got to understand what good customer relations and how to deal with customers. Because if you had bad potatoes in those days, you heard about it the next week when you called to that house. I'm
just worried about Jeremy. You're starting off with a market garden box scheme now. This is your future, like 750 acres of... Paul, talk to us just about, because this always blows my mind, how many broccoli plants did you sow from seed? Bear in mind, I've 6 at home, right? 6 broccoli plants. How many did you sow?
Over 10 million.
10 million broccoli plants, all from seed?
All from seed.
Yeah.
And we grow them in a nursery from seedlings right up to transplant stage. Then we transplant them, harvest them, pack them, distribute them into supermarkets and food service.
How many broccoli growers are there in the state at the moment?
In 2018, there was about 16. Today, there are 5. Okay.
So chances are, if you're buying broccoli in a supermarket, it's probably yours or 1 or 2 others.
Yeah. There's about 3 are packing for supermarkets.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We're going to come back to all of that. Thank you, Paul. And then just before we get into more conversations, I want to introduce John Gibbons, who I think a lot of people in this room would know. He does a weekly slot with Matt Cooper on The Last Word. and I think one of the most compelling communicators on climate issues that we have in this country. He was shouting about this stuff like long before anybody else got interested through his column in the Irish Times. So like a voice crying in the wilderness. He could be the environmental movement's John the Baptist, I guess.
We know what happened to John the Baptist, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. I was just teeing that up for a reason, John. But I have two questions for you. Can you introduce yourself firstly, but also then can you give us a sort of flavour of the big picture, some of the issues that I've kind of discussed in the intro there, but like what does the landscape look like if we think about a vision of a food system that nourishes people and planet? Where are we at with that at the moment? And introduce yourself first, John, please.
Yeah, so I guess in more recent times, maybe the last 20 years or so, I've been in and around environmental journalism, but no background in environmental issues whatsoever. Like Paul, I grew up on a farm, and I was inspired by that to leave the farm and go and find a cushy indoor job, because farming isn't for everybody, and it's genuinely tough. Having said that, when I think back to kind of, again, early childhood, we had a kitchen garden, we had a cow, we weren't dairy, but we had a cow for the fresh milk for the kitchen. We had a few hens for eggs, and my mother would occasionally go out and snap a neck for the chicken for dinner, and so on. So we had that sort of almost the movie Babe, that sort of almost bucolic farming idea. Now that was really back when I was very young, and I think a lot of people, it has been said, their idea of what farming is like is a little bit what I've just described. They kind of have this idea of it, like Farmer Hoggett, and it works like this. And I'm afraid that is not an accurate impression, let's say. You teed it up in your introduction to say that globally, I guess our food systems, which obviously include agriculture, are among the chief pressures. Number one in biodiversity, and number two in climate change. It's reckoned that somewhere, depending on how you calculate it, between a quarter and a third of all greenhouse gas emissions emanate from our food systems. But it's very unevenly spread. Let me put it this way. Livestock systems globally use 83% of the farming land of the world, but they produce 18% of the world's calories. 83% of the land producing 18% of the calories and about 34% of the proteins. So what that tells us, in fact, contrary to what we're told that we're fed by corporations and multinationals, most of the food for the 8 billion people in the world is actually produced by what we would pejoratively call peasant farmers, smallholders. They are, in fact, the people producing the most food from the least land with the least impacts. So that is the basis of the global food system. But the impacts, the negative impacts, the massive carbon and methane impacts are almost exclusively being driven by the global food corporations. You described the decline in the number of species of plants and animals that we're eating. I mean, that is also mirrored by the incredible contraction and concentration in the number of companies and corporations that control the globalized food system. And it really has reached a crisis point because we need to rein in emissions from the global food system. Let me put it in simple terms. I'm sure you're familiar with the 1.5 degree line and the 2 degree line. Now, let's say, imagine for a moment that we could magically switch off the entire fossil fuel sector. Bang, switched it off. Our food production system alone would push us well past 2 degrees centigrade. So we don't actually have a choice about this. People say, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that. Now, if I can scale this briefly, Mick, back to Ireland, right? I heard a gentleman on the radio this morning, in fact, explaining to the interviewer that we here in Ireland feed 50 million people worldwide. Ergo, we need to continue with our current food production system. Now, the first thing to say is Ireland is a net food calorie importer. We import the food calorie equivalent energy of enough food to feed between 2.5 and 4 million people. We draw on food energy from around the world, and on calorific energy, and on fossil fuel energy, and on imported chemicals, pesticides and nitrates, in order to produce a system which is leaving us profoundly food insecure in Ireland. 85% of all the vegetables and all the fruits that you consume in Ireland, and I'm not talking just about the exotics like the bananas and the pineapples and so on. I'm talking about the regular stuff that grows really, really well in Ireland, the brassicas, the potatoes, and so on. 85% of those are being imported. Same for cereals. Most of the cereals grown in Ireland are fed to cattle or other livestock. So we're completely dependent on imported cereals, for example, for our entire bread and milling sector. Imported cereals. Now, that to me is an incredible situation, that this country that markets itself as a food island is profoundly food insecure. Now, let's just play briefly a little game. And let's imagine that bad things can happen in the world. Just, I know it's crazy, but let's just imagine that we could be looking at, in the next, say, decade or half a decade, breakdown or disruption to the global food supply chain. Okay, let's just say those fleets of ships that move all the goods in and out of this country, let's say that they weren't moving or they were down to a trickle. What would happen in Ireland? Would we be able to say to our farming community, okay guys, the exports basically have tanked because we, by the way, export 90% of our beef and dairy, which is the overwhelming bulk of our food production in Ireland. And we're very good, by the way, at producing beef and dairy. We genuinely
John,
are.
I was going to ask about that,
Yep.
though. So you said, and I've heard our former Taoiseach, Cleo Varadkar, making that point, we feed 50 million. What do we mean by that, actually? Because it's not a made-up stat from somewhere. What do they mean by that?
Sure. It's quite a clever way of putting it. Let's say that I don't know, brought in 500 Mars bars here tonight and gave everybody in the audience a couple of Mars bars each. Then I say on the way out, I've just fed 500 people. No, I haven't. I've given people a Mars bar. That's the difference. So what we do is we produce one piece of the food puzzle for people. So, for example, Ireland, we recently had a food expo to Asia. And one of the things that we're promoting is €27 a kilogram steaks being sold, say, in Indonesia, which you might say on the one hand is a wonderful achievement, and I suppose it is, but that in no way is alleviating world hunger. The number one use for Irish milk, by the way, isn't for drinking. We drink about 10% of the milk production in Ireland is available on the fresh milk market. The rest of it is powderised and exported. Now, there's obviously other products developed from dairy as well, of course, like butter and cheeses and so on. But a huge amount of it is powderised and then shipped around the world into markets like Saudi Arabia, China, the UK, as a breast milk replacement.
And that all goes towards the 50 million number, presumably, each one of those.
Correct. So we're feeding hungry babies whose mothers have been basically persuaded that the sophisticated Western thing to do is to shovel Irish cow's milk into your baby, which of course is a whole other day's work. But that's the situation. We should be an engine of food production. And let me start. You know that thing on an airplane where they say, in the event of a sudden decompression and the mask drops, put your own mask on first. We need, before we talk about this rubbish about feeding 50 million people, we need to feed 5 million people. We need to achieve domestic food security. That little test that I talked about a moment ago, the idea that we're cut off from the sea lanes have gone down, we're cut off. Can we feed our population? If that were to happen tomorrow, we would have starvation in Ireland within 4 weeks. That's how close we are to that. And this is an island, by the way, that has a unique cultural history of famine. And what a tragedy, with all the technology available to us, all the methods, all the systems, to blow it in the world that we live in now and end up back basically where we started 200 years ago. And frankly, you might say that's a very doomy prognostication, but that's the way we're headed.
Yeah.
I mean, we're headed towards a world of basically climate breakdown. I mean, you alluded to it earlier, Mick, about we're currently importing foods from places like Spain and Morocco that are burning up. They're not going to be able to produce food. And if they're not burning up during the summer, they're getting flooded out in the spring, or it's too cold. For example, in Italy recently, they had 12 frost days in a row. They never have 12 frost days in a row. Guess what? It pretty much wiped out the vegetable harvest. So we have to come up with a resilient food system, one that meets the actual calorific requirements of the population of this country. Could we please do that first? And the number one way to do that, by the way, number one with a bullet, is horticulture systems. This is production to feed human beings. We're super good at producing grass mostly to shovel into livestock to turn through a very circuitous process back into energy. To give you a simple example, if you want to produce a calorie of energy in the form of red meat, say a piece of beef steak, you put roughly 100 calories of primary energy in to get 1 calorie back out on the other side. So if you want 100 calories of beef, you've got to put in 10,000 calories of input. It's a phenomenally inefficient system. So we're good at producing foods. I have nothing against meat and dairy, but it should be part of a balanced food production. The Dutch, for example, they have an island or a country the size of Munster. 17 million people live in there, by the way, and yet they produce 5 times more agricultural exports than this country in a land area the size of Munster. Why? They have 10,000 hectares under glass. That also climate-proofs them, reduces pesticide load, reduces water consumption. We need to get smart with our agriculture system, not because because we're pro-farmer or anti-farmer, because we're connected to the land, because we eat 3 times a day if you're lucky. We're all connected to our food systems. It's the most primary thing. If we lose this, we lose everything.
Okay, to build on that, I suppose, Paul, what strikes me is that this should be Irish horticulture's moment in the sun in many ways, because all of the health science and the climate science is telling us we need to eat more plants. Why have we gone from a situation where we had 400 growers at the start of this century and now have less than 60? What's going on?
Below cost selling.
Okay.
Cheap food policy promoted by, I suppose, the greed of supermarkets to gain market share. I dealt with a supermarket buyer today, 29 years of age, new in the job, couldn't understand why there was going to be a gap next week because we weren't starting on the day we were supposed to start.
Why? Explain why there's going to be a gap.
Spain is burning up. The crop is finishing early. We had a horrendous spring. We didn't get our crop in the ground because it was too wet to plant at the particular time. And it's been particularly cold in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So we're now dealing with a gap situation in a crop. Somebody told me that if you go into a supermarket tomorrow and look at the country of origin of every product on the shelf, there's hardly, apart from glasshouse produced product which is insulated from that, there's hardly any fresh produce.
So normally when would you have broccoli on the shelf?
We normally are anything between the 10th and 15th of June. It's going to be the 20th to 25th this year.
Okay.
And that week, it's like, to the supermarket buyer, it's, oh my God, what are we going to do? They think it's almost like commodity that we manufacture, that we're not working with nature.
Yeah.
And we're so much, at the behest of what happens in the weather. And they've forgotten about that wet spring already.
Yeah.
Because they're not educated in the process of buying. They come straight out of college. They're given that job, and their job really is to get a margin on the product, not to sustain the supply chain.
So, what do those buyers or maybe more some more senior people in the supermarkets think when they see veg growers going out? At some point they must be thinking this is a huge risk. Actually, what do they understand that it's headed in that direction?
It's only in the last 18 months that they've actually woken up to the fact. The Cathal Lenahans, as you showed earlier on, that was a sort of a defining moment. Here was 4th generation farmer, really, really good at what he did. They weren't in it for the money, the quick buck. This was a lifelong business that was handed down from generation to generation, lost. And since he's gone out of that, I guarantee you if he was in business today, he'd have product on the shelf because he'd have innovated and have had some way of managing to have had some crop in the ground.
Yeah. So, the price promotions that I kind of seem to remember these starting to happen, they were Christmas price promotions originally. Am I right in saying that? They were the Christmas veg for 49 cents.
It wasn't just 49. It went down as low as 9 cent.
Wow.
I mean,
Do you know how much it costs you to get broccoli out of the ground?
I can tell you it's a lot more than 49 cents, let alone 9 cent.
Yeah.
And cheap food, then people's expectations are cheap. But cheap, it needs to be affordable. I'm not advocating expensive food. It needs to be affordable. But for something to undermine, if I'm a grower and I have a crop in the ground, my first responsibilities are to pay the suppliers who've supplied me the inputs of that crop. I have to pay them back. So somebody comes to me and says, well, I have bad news for you. We're not going to give you what we agreed. We're going to give you X amount. I'm stuck with that crop with no other market. I have no choice but to take what I'm offered. And that was the situation before the capitulation of the grower numbers, as I told you earlier, in 2018, how many broccoli growers there were and compared to today.
Yeah.
And cheap food has a cost. It has had a cost to the way people manage their businesses, the way they look after their staff, retain their staff. If you don't retain your staff, you don't have a future in your business. If you don't invest back into your business as regards your soils, your site, your machinery, your people, everything, all parts of it, and particularly your soils. And, we embarked on a venture in 2017. We converted the home farm into an organic production unit. And the learnings I've had on my soils from that conversion and that I have transferred over to my conventional production, and you spoke about the worms, I have a sort of a funny story on the other side of that. The field at the back of my house today is full of organic broccoli, and we ploughed it out of organic clover and grass. Every crow and seagull in Kildare is in there today, but it's not just eating the worms. The buggers are pulling up my fucking plants, and I'm gaps now in my production. So I just have to suck it up and, take, because there's nothing I can do. They're there because the soil is good and really, really rich, and we've enriched that. But we monocropped that ground, as my father had grassing for years, and then we went into a tillage scenario, and then I went into veg production, but I was maintaining a rotation. But it was gradually starting to die out. And when you put the plough into it today, it's just incredible when you see how quickly it's rehabilitated itself.
Can you before I move on, can you just speak to the climate change related weather events that have happened, I suppose, in the last 5 years? What has happened and what impact has it had for you?
Okay, I suppose it's climate events. We've seen the beast from the east following, really serious drought, a series of storms, extremely wet winters, extremely mild winters, and they create their own problems because frosty winters, you get frost, it wipes out the diseases and the spores of the diseases and the pests that are there that are natural. So frost is as important to us as, a mild spring. So, people say, I meet a person in a shop and they said to me, isn't it a lovely mild winter? And I'm thinking, well, it's not really good for us. And then I'm there in the spring and I'm moaning like an old farmer moans, and I'm saying, oh, Jesus, is it ever going to dry up? It's raining. Yet we started irrigating our crops last week, and here we are 4 or 5 weeks without rain.
Already?
Already, because they rooted shallow because it was so wet when we planted them. The roots are all in the top 12 centimetres.
And then we've had a couple of serious droughts over the last 5 years as well.
We've probably had 2 significant droughts in 5 years.
Okay.
And then, last June, we came into 6 weeks of a dry spell. It was about the 19th of June, the rain came and I was going, oh, thank God. And then it didn't stop raining until April,
Yeah.
And it affected everybody, that everybody in the street was talking about it.
Yeah.
So we're having really big weather events. If you look at the video clips of Murcia in Spain last week, they had a flash flood, and the airport in, I think it was Menorca or Mallorca, and it was flooded. These are, extraordinary events. It's not the norm. We expect Spain to be dry, but having not had rain for 1 full year in Murcia, and then they get flooded out of it last week. So it's very difficult to grow product and to produce any vegetable or any fruit in that type of extreme weather event.
Yeah. So it's unpredictable at the best of times, but it's made it entirely more unpredictable now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Karen, can I bring you into to shift gears a little bit? Again, that sort of that vision that I kind of said to John in the question to him, like a food system that nourishes people and planet. Like, how do you think we're doing in terms of nourishing people, I suppose, because that, I think, primarily the health implications of food is what's driving you?
Yeah, so I guess, firstly, trigger warning, I would say that most people in this room are undernourished. I used to say malnourished, but then that was too much for people. But essentially, what is happening, and just maybe to follow on from John's point, to give you some context around what we're able to do here, and okay, it's 100 years later, but in and around 1900, we were producing about 700,000 hectares of wheat for human consumption. And today, that's under 2,000 acres. So we have enough grain in this country to feed a third of the population for a third of the day, basically. That's where we're at. But when you look at all the stats worldwide, Ireland was one of the third best growers of wheat in the world, certainly in Europe. And so I just want to give you some hope that if you do make better buying decisions, the landscape could change radically and quickly. Now, around World War II, shit got really real here. So basically, a number of mills around the landscape were British-owned, Ranks being one of the big ones, there near Shannon Airport. So they were producing 30% of the flour for Ireland in and around the 1930s, 1940s. And then there was lots of Shannon meetings, and by the way, I definitely encourage you to Google all these Shannon meetings in and around the 1930s. They're hugely interesting. They bring sourdough into the Shannon, and they're all tasting the sourdough, and they're comparing an English sourdough versus an Irish. Anyway, it's gold. It's a comedy waiting to happen. Anyway, so in and around World War II, we actually have data to say that the health of the Irish nation went up, because during this period of time, the extraction that we were taking went up and up and up because we had a food security issue. And so most Irish people were eating brown bread. And so all of our kind of neurological conditions decreased, heart disease decreased, cancer decreased. So we have real data, in the past century that showcases that when we eat mindfully and we eat a whole food diet, our health increases. So, I mean, I guess on the panel here where I sit is that education is the thing that we don't have. Education basically differentiates all of us. When we were getting ready for you guys to come, I was just saying, I'm just so fucking sick of seeing Mercedes parked in Aldi car parks. I just think there's, there's a whole thing around, we've got, food prices and making food accessible and blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, and I would say most people in this room agree, that we have a shame culture in Ireland, and we have a notions culture, and we have a don't be getting too big for your boots. Like, a lot of my customers live in villages and rural places all around Ireland and in the UK. And lots of them will report to me, Karen, you know what? Thank God I came to your school day, because the 40 family members that live in and around me are kind of shaming me for valuing my health. So ultimately, I think that's the problem that needs addressing, because supermarkets and choice is always going to exist whilst capitalism exists. But what we can work on is being better humans to one another and not outsourcing our the curation of our health to supermarkets and GPs and the like. But basically what we're trying to do is encourage people to eat food that has been put through a process to make it digestible, and to eat the whole food. Because if you're not eating the outside of the foods, including a little bit of dirt, you don't have the enzyme activity necessary to digest that food. You don't have the B vitamins necessary to prevent you from contracting Alzheimer's when you age. And you don't have the fibers necessary to allow you to detox your body. So by not eating a whole food diet that is made up of many plants, you are basically malnourishing yourself, and you are giving yourself every opportunity to contract some fatal illness. And that's what's happening right now.
Do you think we're spending enough of our household budgets on food?
So in Ireland, we spend 6% of our budget on food. That's obviously ludicrous, because the data said so, because of the deaths we're experiencing from that. Followed by 15% in other parts of Europe, followed by 35 in Spain, 45 when you go further East Europe. So, we're spending 6% and other countries are spending 45%. We have a heart disease, cancer, epidemic here right now. We really, really do. And I guess there's probably every person in this room probably knows someone who's passed away from a cancer or a heart disease, and you know what that leaves you with, the emptiness, the community is without that person. And so then this kind of trickles into this culture that then is creating stagnancy. So what I see, having lived in the UK for 13 years, where they don't experience shame at all, certainly in the way we do, they like pleasure. I find that coming home to Ireland, especially the west coast of Ireland, which is a very interesting place and full of grottos, I just was like, God, we really don't like ourselves very much. And I have first-hand experience of that because on my school days, I have many women, probably the age of 50 and up, and they come to me like sacrificed lambs, They have given their world to their family. They have given their world to their significant other, to their workplace. They have given their world to everyone around them. And now they come maybe just out of menopause and they've had a shit menopause. By the way, if you're perimenopausal or you have shit periods or you're going through the menopause, that's because of diet. Pre the 1900s, we didn't have the Moody app and all these apps that tell us what we're meant to be experiencing because we were eating in a way that fed our hormones. So, the menopause, everything is changing. We are completely different people because we are not eating local whole foods. It's as simple as that. Your estrogen levels are down because you don't have flaxseed in your diet. We used to have 400 growers of flaxseed around this country. It's just so simple. And so I sit here in front of you today just hugely frustrated, obviously, but very happy because my health is fantastic.
Well, good for you. I mean, that's the main thing.
Sorry, I'm just in this game so long, I'm just fuck this. We are not eating well. Yeah. We do not know how to eat. No one is supporting us. Fuck off, government. Just fuck off. Leave us to our own devices for a little bit of time, and between us, we would get out of this mess. And, okay, we probably would have a ban on flights abroad. That would be the only thing. You can't leave the country. You've got to be a problem solver. You've got to stick with us.
You really should tell us what you really think, though. I don't like you sitting on the fence like this. I prefer... No, what I want to ask you, though, because we have spoken about the €25 loaf, right? And I know this is a bit of a trigger for you, maybe, because it's something that we do need to get under the hood of, I think, to explain. But I do think it comes back to this issue, and this affects you as well, Paul, that it takes a brave individual to have this discussion about getting people to spend more on food. And people before Profit came out before the election and asked for a price cap on food, actually, the staples, including bread. Talk to us about that. And then you also mentioned something I thought was really interesting, which is about that sort of shame culture, particularly for women, when it comes spending, enough money on food that makes them feel well. But tell us about the €25 loaf.
Okay, so when I first moved back to Ireland, I actually thought that Teachscola was going to be more of a bakery school because I knew education is what's needed here, right? And I was like, no one in Ireland is going to buy bread for €25. But as soon as I opened the bakery, everyone was coming, all walks of life. Because science and maths are taught to such a good degree in our country, and I think we're also, Catholic Ireland, all of our parents were like, you got to get straight A's, you got to get at least a B. We're a studious bunch of people. And so as soon as I opened and people found out about it's going to treat your gut health issues, your hormonal issues, your immune function, your mental health issues, we had lots of males coming to us to get off mental health medication. It was a really easy sell. I mean, there was a load of press and stuff about what's your one doing, but as I said, I don't suffer from that notion mentality anymore. But the €25 loaf, basically, that costs us ingredients alone nearly €15 to make. So the cost of that €25 loaf is €15 in terms of ingredients. And then the rest of the €10 covers salary and just running the operation. And because life is short, I am not only trying to like address your health, but I'm also trying to ensure that people that work in food get paid better. And so my staff probably get paid the best out of any food company in Ireland, I would say right now. And that's something I'm really passionate about, because to Paul's point, and like, legacy is important. Like, what we've done is we haven't created a food legacy. We haven't created farming legacy because there's better options. So we have to pay the people that work in the food system better. That's a huge part of this. Like my staff are first and foremost, and then it's the customer. But yeah, with the 25-euro loaf, it's basically loads of really high-value organic seeds, nuts and grains, olive oil, regeneratively farmed eggs, and all the ingredients we're using, because they come from regenerative organic farms, they have 6 times the amount of nutrients that a regular commercial farm does. So, for example, a regeneratively farmed egg has 6 times the amount of omega of a shop-bought egg. Omega is really important for both, preventing Alzheimer's and heart disease. So go figure. When you're driving the country road and you see 6 eggs for sale for €2, you better stop and buy those eggs.
Brilliant. Jess, I want to bring you in, just to speak about the problem of plastic. Like how again that idea of a food system that nourishes the planet. How far away are we from that at the moment when it comes to plastic?
Very far. Yeah. I think one of the most frustrating things for me is when somebody comes in and they believe the lie that they've been told that recycling is this great solution, that it's going to get us out of the problem. I have so many people come in, and you don't want to burst their bubble, but they come and they say, oh, I recycle everything. I clean it all out. I recycle it properly. And I'm going, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. So
why not?
Because plastic, for example, can only be recycled a few times. Some of it can't be recycled at all, and then we have to do something else with it. And what do we do with it? We incinerate it. Now, yes, that incineration gives us energy that we need, but it also releases millions of tons of CO2 into the environment.
Yeah.
So that's not the solution at all. But I think when it comes down to it, when you actually look at it, why does rice have to be in a plastic bag? There is absolutely no need for a dry good. Why do lentils have to be in a plastic bag? We bring in massive amounts of food, and I can say we've had 1 moldy bag of rice in almost 5 years. So we really don't need to worry about this. And we've been to this condition, a few years ago when they said, oh, you can recycle soft plastic. And people were saying, oh, isn't that amazing? And I was going, no, it's absolutely not amazing. This new deposit scheme with the bottles, it's okay, maybe it's a little better, because maybe it's incentivizing people and they're not putting it in their bin, but it's not the solution to the problem. So I think we're just putting Band-Aids on Band-Aids on Band-Aids, and we're moving further and further away. We're not looking at the root issue here at all.
And I think at a basic level, all of us have this sense that the stuff that we're putting in the recycling bin is ending up like in the picture, like on a beach somewhere in Bangladesh. Like that's the concern. Like it doesn't feel like it's the end of the story at all.
No, I'm not good with numbers, so I don't know the stats, but we're really not recycling very much of it. 9% of our plastic is being recycled. The rest of it's being incinerated or it's being sent abroad. And once it leaves here, we have no idea what happens. We don't know what happens to it here. So, I don't think we can really say what's going on. But a lot of it's just sitting in shipping containers. Maybe it's being burned. Maybe it is being recycled once or twice. And then what happens to that plastic?
So tell us about what happens in store with you then in the Good Neighbour. So you've got, obviously people can bring their own containers, they fill up and so on. Have you found, people struggling to figure out how it all works, or a big mess, or feeling this is just not very convenient? I have to remember to bring loads of containers with me.
No, because I think when people come in for the first time, it's intimidating. It's a little overwhelming. They don't want to ask the question, how does this work? But then when you get the hang of it, and it just becomes part of your routine, it's really not an issue after that. That washing up liquid bottle that you have sitting at home, that's really good quality plastic. You could probably refill that 40 times before it starts breaking down. And people take pride in that. I know I have some regular customers in here. We have people who have labels on the same bottles from when they started shopping with us 5 years ago. So these things are not disposable. We've been told that they're disposable, that they're being recycled, whatever's happening to them, and they're not. And I think the empowerment that people feel from doing something good kind of negates any of the inconvenience. No, I'm not going to lie, it's not as convenient, it's not as fast, but there's that feel-good factor that I think kind of overshadows that.
Can people come into you and do like a big percentage of their overall shop, or are they having to go to like 3 or 4 other places as well?
Well, I think it depends how you eat. I'm a vegan, so I get probably 95% of what I need in the shop. I like to cook as well, so we have nothing ready-made. You're not going to come in and find, I don't know, pizza. But everything else you need, we have. We have 700 unpackaged products, and also I think it is important, we were talking about crop shortages. We're really seeing that now. And we're having really interesting conversations with people because they come in and they are sometimes furious that they can't get what they're looking for. But I think it also causes people to stop and think a little bit. Why don't we have black lentils? We have a conversation about it, we give them an alternative, and then they get more creative. So I think it kind of fosters a bit of creativity in people. It causes them to stop and think a little bit. Because when you get to the supermarket and there's no sultanas on the shelves, you don't ask why, you just grab the raisins. But you might ask one of our staff why, and they can tell you that, well, the crop failed in Turkey last year, and we're also going to see a shortage of apricots. And then you understand what's going on and why it's happening. So I think you can get most of what you need from us, and I think the other side of it is that it really empowers people to make a change in what they're buying.
Mm-hmm. Paul, you when we interviewed you for the podcast, there was a couple of things you said that really struck me as being kind of paradoxical. One of them was you said climate change could be an opportunity for the Irish horticulture sector, which I found a bit quizzical. And do you want to just speak to that? I suppose the other thing I was trying to think what the other thing was. I'm worried I wouldn't be able to remember. But you were saying that the competition for land from solar farms is turning into a real problem for you, which I just thought was something that I hadn't heard about before.
Well, on the solar farms, to start with, we have several big land tracts that are owned by big farm holdings, and they're putting 100, 200, 300 acres each in it, 1,000 acres in total going in our area, of the best farmland in the area. And you say to yourself, why would they not use, the marginal land? But, they're saying, well, it's the aspect. The engineers come in and they picked out, but of course they picked the fields. So I suppose we have that, contradiction now. It's good for the environment because it ticks the boxes. However, it's taking good productive land out of production. Our first competitor was the dairy, which is now turned into the demon because of the pollution issues around it. And I'm not saying it needs to be managed, but it has taken a lot of land. Now it's what do you call it? It's solar. My neighbours would probably say it's broccoli, but it's the good versus the bad, and it's a bit like the packaging. We wrap some of our broccoli in plastic, but it extends the shelf life 3 times. It cuts down food waste, and it's that sort of balance of the good with the bad. And the supermarkets want it wrapped in plastic because it cuts down the mess, and it's a unit. People aren't coming in like in the old Super Quinn days where they broke off the heads of the stalks from the heads. And
what a great idea. I never even thought of doing that. They
had the saw on the side of the thing. The health and safety guy wouldn't allow you today. And I suppose it's all about sort of balance and getting a balance. What was the first question?
I can't remember.
It was probably the difficult one that I...
Oh no, it was climate change being an opportunity, and we are going to go to the audience for questions. So if you've got a question, please put up your hand, and we'll start thinking about getting microphones too.
I would think the opportunity is that we have a less severe climate. Spain is going to run out of water. They're going to have to stop. You can't produce products where you have no water. We have times when we have too much, and we have times when we have too little, but we have certainly a more benign climate. But if you get 45, 50 degrees, even your glasshouse industry, as we spoke about here, is actually impossible because it goes up to 150 degrees in your glasshouse. So the plants just shut down and stop producing. So there is definitely opportunity, and technology also will enable some of that opportunity to be...
It should give us, John, though, extraordinary pause for thought that, like what Paul has just said there, that Spain will run out of water. Our veg industry is on its knees, and yet we're assuming we're going to be able to import from there in the future. Like, it doesn't stack up.
No, it doesn't. And like I said in my opening remarks, we sort of combined some of the worst of all possible worlds. For example, in Ireland, we have a lot of what we would call agriculturally marginal land, but virtually all of it is mowed by either deer or sheep. And this, amazingly enough, includes our national parks. So people would think of a national park as being this pristine area set aside for nature. We have 6 major national parks. They're all pretty much overrun with either deer or sheep. We have no predators, obviously, for the deer, and hardly predators for the sheep either. So with the result that we have such a diminishment of nature. And there's such an incredible opportunity. People may have heard of a biologist called E.O. Wilson. He proposed an idea called the half-Earth theory. And basically that says that for humans to have a reasonable shot of getting out of the 21st century in some kind of something recognizable by today's standards, we need to give back roughly 50% of the land surface of the Earth and probably 70 to 80% of the oceans need to be handed back to nature. Not because you're tree huggers, but because we need natural systems to function in order to not collapse. Ecosystem collapse basically brings the whole house of cards down. And that's the point, really. We're going to have to figure out a way, Mick, to actually consolidate our agricultural production. I said we need to intensify it. Paradoxically, we need this thing called sustainable intensification. We need to intensify it in a much tighter area and leave the rest of the land back for nature, to let nature do its thing. For example, our boglands. It's an absolute crime that our boglands are still being destroyed. Now, a state company did this for 60 or 70 years, which was a crime in itself, but it still continued. And I'm not talking, by the way, about the guys in the John Hine picture with the donkey and the hoe. I'm talking about industrial bulldozers digging out our bogs and digging out bogs on areas of special area of conservation bogs that are being destroyed today, right? And this is shooting ourselves in the foot in the most incredible way. And so much of this is going on because of political cowardice in this country and bowing down to vested interests, and in some cases, a handful of bloody-minded people.
Yeah, thank you, John. Okay, so have we got any questions? We've lady in the front here and then there maybe, and we'll take, I think, 2 or 3 questions. So yes, please.
So we've talked a lot about individual actions, and obviously we can all take individual actions, but are there any upcoming legal cases or policies that are coming through that any of you would like to highlight that we should be talking to our TDs about?
John, do you want to take that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I mean, over the last 4 years, when there were quite a lot of Greens still in the European Parliament, we had a whole bunch of measures, the EU Farm to Fork policy and the EU New Green Deal. And these are genuinely radical proposals. Needless to say, they've been fought and watered down to a homeopathic level right across Europe, particularly here in Ireland, where it's hard even to find a trace of the original things. So if you're concerned about some of the issues that we're talking tonight, contact your TDs, contact your new MEPs about this and let them know that you care. Politicians are constantly saying to people like me, I don't hear this stuff on the doorstep, John. I don't know what you're going on about, right? The same thing was said before the crash of 2008. They weren't talking about the stability of the financial system on the doorstep either. That didn't stop it collapsing.
Great point.
So
yeah.
I think that's something we need to keep in mind, that there's a good chance that you know more about this than the politicians who are trying to reassure you.
It looks like we may not have a Green Party MEP either to push this.
Almost certainly not, yeah.
Paul, I just wanted to ask just on to that question as well, that like is there anything coming down the tracks in terms of like price protection or an ombudsman or anything that would give you reason?
The food regulator is in place now, and that's trying to get some fair practice, to be, I suppose, upheld, because there was an awful lot of non-payment of suppliers weren't being paid on time. Tenders were being put out, but they weren't really tenders. So I was asked to tender for a a product and they were told, oh no, but the other one is cheaper. It was just an auction to the bottom, really. And the person who tendered against me mightn't even be able to have the capabilities of growing the crop, yet we were put under pressure. So the food regulator is after...
So the food regulator is in situ now?
It's in situ now, but it has to
And
get
does
its
it have
into
teeth?
it. Well, I sit on the board.
I don't know what that means. Is that good or bad? I don't.
I can assure you, I will uphold that what is done there, they're currently investigating into the supply chain.
Massive price protection for broccoli coming out. A question there.
Hi, my question is from Jess. Apart from reducing plastic, what other sustainability practice you do in your business? And the second is, what advice would you like to give to the entrepreneur who is looking to start a business in sustainability? Sorry, trying to be a little clever. 2 questions in one.
Very tough question.
Yes, that is a tough question. Good one. So obviously our main goal is to reduce plastic waste, but our next ones are to support as many Irish businesses as possible and to buy as organic as we possibly can. Obviously, that's not always possible. We need to be affordable. We still need to be a business, but at this point I think we're at 75 to 80% organic. So that's a really big focus for us because I think that's just, you were talking before, depleting this. There's just so much around organic that we need to focus on. And then the other thing is we're really trying to engage our suppliers, especially the local ones, in a circular economy. So you might not know, but a circular economy is basically the way that the food is delivered to us, the packaging it comes in, is cleaned out and reused. So we're trying to do that, and it is shocking how hard that is here.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the same everywhere. I'm Canadian, obviously, but it's shocking that how difficult it is to have any kind of change. So those are really our focuses right now. And to start a business in sustainability, I think you just have to have have a thick skin. Yeah. There's been a lot of shops like mine that have opened and closed in the last few years. And I think any business is difficult, but for some reason, people are incredibly critical of a sustainable business. And I don't have a thick skin. And my poor husband has to hear about it all the time. So I would say you need to go into it knowing it's going to be hard and be okay with that.
Yeah, what a great answer. Lady in the middle there, and then maybe just one more question.
Hi, thanks so much. I've learned so much, and you definitely inspired me to start growing my own fruit or veg.
Job done.
Can I ask you a question, Paul, just with regard to potential collaborations? Because when we talk about reimagining systems, we often talk about collaborations, new partnership, new ways of working with people maybe were previously our competitors. Are you working in any way with retailers or any other partners to actually tackle the issues together? Because I would imagine that for retailers, they want to have food on shelves 20 or 52 weeks of the year to sell to their customers.
Yeah, great question.
That's a really good question, and it's certainly on the horizon of the supermarkets. They're now starting to worry about the future of supply chains. In 2019, I formed a producer organisation where I got 5 like-minded growers together from large to very small scale, and we collaborate. There's 5 of us. We're actively looking for new members. And we get some help from the EU to run our group. We don't just collectively market, we collaborate on farm visits, on best practices. We get funding from the EU to implement change, particularly environmental change. We get some very, very good funding with regard to that. My big fear when I started that group was that when I was having the conversation with the supermarkets, and this will give you an idea of the mindset of them at the time, was, so you're going to get some help from the EU. Well, what portion of that are you going to pass on to us? Because that was the attitude at the time. Now, I would stand my ground and say, if you want us to be here in the future, you have to allow us to retain that and reinvest it in our business. But, the collaboration is hugely important going forward. The strength in unity, in that it's huge. It's added huge value to our business. I go on a visit of a mushroom farm because a mushroom grower is a member of our group, and you'd say, well, what would I learn on a mushroom farm, and you wouldn't believe, different things, practices, staff training, different ways they go about their business. Likewise, when they came to my farm and they were looking at my plant nursery, and that's what it's all about, and knowledge sharing and information sharing. And at the end of the day, all we're doing is producing food, be it carrots or whatever, broccoli or whatever, and the principles are the same, and the little learnings, and even the sharing. We had some obsolete machinery. We were able to give it to some of the smaller members and allow them to use it, and they paid me over a long period of time, but for me it was probably going to rust away and get utilised. So collaboration is huge and will become very, very important. That's how the Dutch created such a successful model. They all collaborated and they all worked in groups, and continue to do so.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think we're going to have to leave it at that because we're over time. So I just want to finish. I suppose I think it's a brilliant question for us to finish on, because collaboration is so important, and like I don't want any of us to go away thinking that supermarkets are at fault here. We've all got a role to play as stakeholders in the food system to bring about change. All stakeholders in the system, I think. And just a reminder, we do want everybody to sow some seeds before they go home. Mary from our team is outside. Claude is also out there. We've got seeds and we've got books and all sorts of things out there for you to look at as well. So please go and visit the guys before you leave, would be hugely appreciated. But for now, if you could just give a huge round of applause, and just to say to all our panelists,